All right, everyone. Welcome to the December meetup for Space Data Hackers. My name is James Burk. I'm one of the organizers of Space Data Hackers, as well as the annual Space Apps Seattle Hackathon, which we just had in October. And we're looking forward to doing it again next year in person this time. But I'm also, tonight, I'm wearing another hat. I'm wearing the hat of being a volunteer for the Mars Society, which I've been for 20 years. And I'm going to talk tonight about one of our projects, which is Marspedia. And I also have some news that is going to come out tomorrow that I'm sharing with you guys for the first time in the public. I'm the new executive director for the Mars Society. It's a new paid position that our organization has formed. And it was brought about because we got a $1 million donation from Blue Origin's Club for the Future in the last couple months. And I threw my hat in the ring and there were 40 candidates for executive director and they picked me. So I'll be starting that job later this month. I'm actually wrapping things up at Microsoft right now. And I'm really excited about it. The announcement's coming out tomorrow, but it's like a huge deal for me. It's a huge deal for the organization, the Mars Society. And it's the first time we've had a paid staffer full time. And I'm really hoping to do a good job with that role and helping to grow the organization and fundraise and work on really cool projects like the one I'm about to talk about. So I've actually been working on Marspedia for about 4.5 years, maybe 5 years. Let's talk about what Marspedia is. It's, everyone's heard of Wikipedia. Well, this is the Mars version. It is an online encyclopedia that is using the same software that powers Wikipedia. It's called MediaWiki. But we have some differences about, between Marspedia and Wikipedia. The key difference to me is Marspedia is public domain, which means that there's no restriction on using the content. You don't have to get permission to use the content on Marspedia. You can use it in any project. So you can kind of think of Marspedia as an open source encyclopedia that you can use for any project. We're like Wikipedia, we're maintained by volunteers, and we have an amazing set of volunteers that have worked on this and continue to work on it every day. And we're Mars focused, unlike Wikipedia. We're trying to really go deep on being a resource for people that are interested in Mars, are interested in space, and want to really move the needle on human beings going to Mars. And so I'll talk a little bit about the work we did for categories, which was very innovative work to think through how you would organize information about humans to Mars in the future when people are living and working on Mars. Marspedia is also a great volunteer project, and for people of all ages and skill levels, we want it to be an educational resource. We want it to be a resource that space organizations can utilize as a wiki, for projects and for their own storage of knowledge, and just have it be a public resource, not just for the Mars Society, but for everyone else in the space community. And so, as I mentioned, I've personally been working on it for about 5 years, but the project itself started in 2007. There's a group called the Moon Society, and they set up several wikis in 2007. They set up Lunarpedia and Spacepedia and Marspedia, along with a gentleman by the name of Bruce Mackenzie, who was one of the original Mars Underground folks in the 80s that were working on Mars settlement concepts. And so, I've been a volunteer for the Mars Society for 20 years. And we used to get emails that said, hey, I want to volunteer and work on Marspedia. How can I get started? And we would have to say, well, that's actually not us. And so after a while, we decided to reach out and say, hey, how can we help out with this project? So we ended up joining this effort 5 years ago. And we've taken the lead role at this point with the wiki and added a bunch of new volunteers, a bunch of new content. So one of the first things we did is we built a new category hierarchy. Several of us met multiple times in 2018 and 2019 and talked through how you would organize a wiki for Mars. Sort of like, how would you build the Dewey Decimal System for Mars? Not just all the present day concepts of the planet and past missions and the science concepts, but how would you also fold in future human settlement designs and concepts and some of the things that people are going to care about when we're living and working on Mars? And so we came up with a hierarchy of categories, which I'll talk through. And we're really proud of that work. It was over 100 person hours of discussions and logistics of setting that up. We also did some foundational things to improve the wiki. We created a new logo, which you can see there. That was designed by Paul Conrad, who was a designer that worked at SpaceX. We redesigned the front page. We added a new teacher section. And then we also, once we had the new category hierarchy, we went through and looked at every single article that was on the site. At the time, there were about 400 or 500 articles. And we went through and made sure that they were the kind of articles we would want to have, that they fit in with the categories we created, and we made a bunch of revisions to them. That took about a year or two. We also created a list of what are the articles we want to have. Now that we have this great set of categories, what do we want to have to showcase the content that we think should be on here? And so we created a list of needed articles, and then we sort of worked down that list and created some of the top ones, made a bunch of stub pages. At this point, we still have the needed article list, but we have stubs created for all of those. And so any volunteer can just start working on an article based on that list and help out the project. In the last couple of years, we also added a new feature, which I'll talk more about. We created a Mars Atlas. And so a volunteer by the name of Jim Sikoski, who's a retired science teacher in Ohio, took the lead on this and created a great resource that's free. If you're familiar with the Google Mars website, which has been around for a while, we kind of use that as a reference, but we wanted to go deeper than that. The US Geological Survey has several thousand place names on Mars. And so we wanted to have an atlas that could showcase all those place names. And so we did that. And then finally, as I mentioned, we added a lot of new volunteers, and up to this day, there's several people that work every day on Marspedia, and I'm really proud of that fact. It's a lot like what Wikipedia has going on, where there's people that just kind of work full-time on improving the project, and we have that now with Marspedia. So I'm really proud of that. So currently we have some of the top level metrics there. We have about 800 articles, about 1,500 uploads of individual files, and about almost 250 registered contributors, so people that have user accounts. And it's free to get a user account. There's no cost to help out with Marspedia. And then we have 10 administrators at this point. And so, here's some of the things we were able to do. As I mentioned, we have the prioritized list of needed articles. We have the Mars Atlas. We created a proof of concept of how to create bulk articles. So one of the things we'd like to do long-term is have an article page for every named feature on Mars and have some metadata on that page that points to the other features and what's near it, anything notable nearby. So we have a proof of concept of how to do that. We also created a proof of concept of a 3D Mars globe that Marspedia could tie into, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And recently, I've been having some discussions with someone that's pretty prominent in the educational industry, products industry, and could potentially bring some major funding for this, as well as some expert level, like PhD level help to help out. So that's one of the things that now, as the executive director of the Mars Society, I'm hoping to get done in 2022. Also integrating with some of the related projects that we have at the Mars Society, the Mars VR project, and a science journal that we're talking about doing. So this slide talks about our categories. And as I mentioned, we tried to think through all of the aspects of humans to Mars, not just present day, but also the future concepts. So things like the exploration concepts and planning that you would do for human Mars exploration, the colony settlement designs you'd have, things like the political and ethical, philosophical considerations of having people on Mars long term. Things like Mars analog research. We have several bases around the world that are where people go to practice living and working on Mars, including the one in Utah that we operate at the Mars Society. So having a section for all that research, having a section for outreach and all the advocacy efforts that organizations like the Mars Society do, but also being able to store all the data that they need to store. And then things like Mars movies and music and plays and photography and literature, having a section for that. So we created a list of about 150 categories that roll up to these top 6, top level. And all the articles on Marspedia are categorized with these now. So let me jump into showing you guys Marspedia. So let me flip over to that. And so basically, Marspedia is available at marspedia.org. I'm logged in, and you can actually create a user account or request a user account by going up to the top right there. We have a featured article. We talk about the project here and how anyone can help. People can help by contributing articles that they've already written, by looking at the list of needed articles we have. And anyone could edit this just like Wikipedia. We actually have a visual editor as well as a code-based editor available. And there's lots of search and browse features as well. One of the things we added early on was a teacher start page. So students and teachers could go there. And then, as I mentioned, some of the policies we have are different than Wikipedia. They're less restrictive. On Wikipedia, everything is tagged with a Creative Commons license, so it's harder to share content. And we've deliberately said that Marspedia is public domain unless otherwise noted. So you can use all the content on Marspedia for your project without getting permission or having to give attribution. Again, we're kind of designing this resource to be a long-term resource for everyone in the community. So one of the things I want to show you guys is the atlas. So if I click into that, and you can see here's the top level page. You can kind of get a false color topography image. You can also look at a true color map of Mars. And then you can drill into the different types of features such as volcanoes and craters. Got a geological map. And then one of the things Elon Musk cares about is where's the water. So here's a water abundance map. And then if you really want to dig into the sections of Mars, you really need to learn about the quadrangles. So Mars is organized into a series of quadrangles, each of which are named. And we have an article page for each quadrangle. So I'm going to go to my favorite region, which is Valles Marineris. The floor of Valles Marineris has the highest air pressure on Mars, and so it's an ideal location for a Mars colony. So if I go into that section, Coprates quadrangle, you can see this article page talks all about that area and Valles Marineris. And then I'm going to go into my favorite area, which is Melascasma. As I mentioned, it's thought to be an ideal site for a human colony, given it has the highest air pressure of any site on the planet. And it's also a former lake, so it may have water in abundance. Now, I would consider this page a stub page. There's going to be a lot more information that we have on this type of page long term. You can imagine having a local map of the area, having a list of all the close features to it and how likely water is there. Any missions that have flown over it, maybe linking to the images that they have available in the NASA PDS. or JMars. So lots of things we could do long term, but this is the type of kind of low level stub page that we have now, and you know, gives you a sense of what this resource can be long term. So really proud of this project. One of the things that I'd also like to do in the near term is work on this atlas some more. And the atlas kind of forms what I think of as our areology section, which is areology is the study of Mars, just like geology is the study of Earth. And so what I would like to build and what we have a proof of concept for is a 3D Mars globe that you could view in any web browser, but you could also view in VR. And this would have every name feature displayed depending on the zoom level you have. If you zoom lower down, you'll start to see the smaller craters and volcanoes that weren't visible at this level of zoom that you're seeing now. And then you could click on a feature and maybe get a pop-up of the Marspedia article about that feature. Now, what would also be cool is if you could zoom all the way down to the surface and actually walk around on the surface as if you were there. Now, this is possible with the data that has come back from Mars. There was a mission in 1996 called the Mars Global Surveyor, and it had an instrument on it called the MOLA, the Mars Orbital Laser Altimeter, and it captured altimetry data from the entire globe of Mars. So we already know wherever you are on Mars what the altitude is. And if we overlay that with images, then we can actually build a pretty good 3D model of Mars that you could walk around on. Now, it's not going to be super high fidelity, and there's definitely going to be some gaps, but that's a great project to work on, I think. And we could layer on better imagery from the missions that have gone to specific sites that have landed, that have had rovers go by, have multiple orbiter passes. So you could actually, there'd be parts of Mars that are better resolution than others, but having the entire globe of Mars as one application, I think would be a great thing to have. And so that's one of the things I'd like to work on at the Mars Society and tie that in with Marspedia and our Mars VR project. So I'm going to show you, we did a proof of concept of this already. And let me just play this quick video. So this is working in a browser. This is using a technology that just uses JavaScript, and we overlaid a texture of the whole planet of Mars on a globe, and you can see, you can kind of zoom in and out a little bit. It doesn't have the place names yet, but it does have things like lat long. And so, you know, this is kind of getting to where we want to be. This is the type of application we want to have available in a browser. You know, you don't need any special hardware to run this. You could imagine having this as a museum kiosk that people could just like walk up to and explore Mars with, and it would have, you go all the way down to the surface, be able to walk around, but then you'd have all the Marspedia content. So if you look at a named feature, you'd be able to actually see the article page for that named feature from Marspedia. So for me, that's all within sight. It's all possible. Another project that I really want to work on that has a lot of support at the Mars Society is an archival project for our Mars Desert Research Station. Now, this is a facility we've operated in Utah since the year 2001, and we've had crews rotating through there. We've had over 200 crews, over 1,500 people, and all those folks have generated crew reports, they've taken photos, they've created mission summaries of the research they've done. And so researchers will often want to refer back to previous crews and do various scientific projects with that data. And it's a little bit hard to get now. You kind of have to crawl around different websites and email people to get the information. What we'd like to do, what I'd like to do is put all of this onto Marspedia. So have all the different crews represented, the bios for each crew, the reports that they submitted, the photos that they sent, and all the mission summaries that they've written. So this is literally thousands of pages of material, but it's all, we have it all. It's just in the wrong format right now. It's basically unstructured data that we need to structure. And so, this is one of the projects that we've started working on a couple times, had some false starts, but this is one of the things that I think in 2022 we want to get done and make sure that we have a great resource that researchers can use moving forward, and that also as future crews submit information, it goes into this goes into it systematically in an automated fashion. So, so how you can help with Marspedia? Well, anyone can request an account. It's free. We usually have about a 48-hour turnaround to activate a new account. And once you have an account, you can edit anything on the wiki. There's no approval process that has to happen for your edit to show up on the site. Now, what we will do is we will kind of monitor the edits that people make. And if anyone does anything malicious, or if anyone has some help they need to make their edit even better, we'll kind of go look at it afterwards and help them. But anyone can edit the wiki once they have an account. Wikipedia uses the same model. It's worked really well for them. And then we also have a core group of volunteers that meet, and you can join that. We kind of have a more structured, sort of like a Scrum team or Agile team process that we've done in the past. And definitely tell people about this project. Just talking about the fact that it's out there, that's a huge help to us too. If you have friends that work in education, that are teachers or administrators, or even parents of teachers, tell them about Marspedia, and make sure their science teacher knows about it. If you have anyone that's studying science journalism, we're thinking about having an internship program, so you could have a potential science journalist student contact us and see how they might be able to help. And then you can look at the needed articles list and just pick an article and start working on it. We'd love for people to do that. You can also submit content you've written elsewhere. I mentioned that the licenses for most content on the site is public domain, but we do have some instances of people writing encyclopedia quality articles and submitting them to us, and then putting a different license on it so that it has attribution. So we've done that before, and we're happy to take content you've written that wasn't published somewhere else, or that you have a publishing rights to, and then we can tag it with a Creative Commons license or even a copyright license, and then just kind of segregate that from the rest of the public domain content. You can also help us find experts to write articles. And so we have a smaller list of articles that we really want to have done well, expert articles, and you can help us build those out too. Last thing, I just want to thank all the volunteers that have worked on this over the last couple of years. Here's some of the top ones, although we've had dozens and dozens of other volunteers. These are the ones that have spent the most time on the project. So thanks very much to all those folks. And then finally, I will open it up for questions that folks have. So if anyone has a question about Marspedia, feel free to unmute and ask it right now.
I'm curious about what some of the struggles are you have with the older Mars Society data. It's just not been consistently stored in, uniform formats.
Yeah, essentially we have an email list that we use, and people send in Word documents and photos and text files on the email list. And so, putting that on a website is one thing, but then actually having some metadata that goes along with each crew report or each crew photo is something we want to have. And so it's kind of like we have to reverse engineer what the metadata is and then put it in a consistent format across the 20 years. That's really the technical challenge with it.
Yeah,
Do you
that's
have
pretty
basic
difficult.
time data like timestamps, for instance, not just on the files, but the actual photos and messaging, etc. So
In some cases, although if people save a JPEG, from their original photo, which is what a lot of people do, because one of the things that they suffer from at that station is that it's bandwidth constrained, so you can't usually send your raw camera image. So you can imagine we might have a bunch of photos, but they're not all the same format. So we have to kind of look at, okay, when was it sent? When was the email tagged? That's the date we would go off of.
James, I'm happy to help on the metadata questions and also the education ones, because in in the online learning world and the sharing of open education resources, there are already standards for for how things get categorized. So I'm happy to help on that. And then, sorry I didn't make the early part of the conversation. Do you have any kind of press release that's going out or anything that I can put on my LinkedIn?
Tomorrow morning, you're talking about for my new role? Yeah, tomorrow morning.
No. I don't mind trumpeting your new role, but I'm talking about Marspedia, because I could post about that being available for science projects, and I'm happy to do one for you too. So, but I'm just thinking that I don't think most of the education world knows that there's a resource about Mars that could be this interesting.
We don't have a press release. We do have some flyers we did that we put up at different conferences, so I can send you some of those.
Yeah, if there's something I can post with, I'd be happy to.
Absolutely. Make a note of that. Other questions that folks have?
So what was your technology stack for the 3D globe?
So I believe we use 3.js for that. I don't know if that's the best approach, but that's kind of what we did for the proof of concept. If we try to do it with VR, a VR kind of approach, my Mars VR project uses Unity, but we want that to be available on the web as well. So I don't think Unity is a great option for this. I've looked at WebGL and that sort of ecosystem too. I think that might be a good option.
So I just ran, one of the reasons I asked is NASA's new Eyes on Earth. I only ran across it today. They seem to have upgraded it. See if I'll post a link in. Has real-time Earth globe with the satellite tracks and all of that. I thought it was rather good eye candy. But so one of the other things with that I've occasionally contributed on Wikipedia is the cartography, and the I should contact the JMars people and see if they have any, how simple. So they have this interface, right? And it's a complicated interface because you can get to everything that was ever taken on Mars there. But if you just wanted to do, like Wikipedia has the simple cartography of here's the globe, here's the square of the area of interest, and here's the little shaded thing which tells you what you're looking at. That very simple kind of contextual cartography. I'm wondering if features could be like reduced out of there, and the capability may already be there where somebody could whip together a little map of their thing, in a few minutes or
so I've actually tried that, Michael, with JMars for another project, crypto project that we're doing. And yeah, there are definitely ways to export images out of JMars and then reassemble them with a different approach. It's a little grunt work heavy, although I think there is an object model or a way to automate JMars. I haven't really gone deep on that. But yeah, no, JMars, I really think JMars is a great tool. It's just,
It's too much as
how,
it is.
how to get, how to, yeah, it's definitely a sort of, NASA grade, tool, but how do you get the good stuff out of it in a way that you could use it with a more modern system? That's the challenge, I think, in my opinion.
And the other tactic might be to make a QGIS bundle to just make it easy to assemble, the very basic data sets as a geo package. That somebody, if they wanted to install QGIS, they could have all of the, not all, but the most significant ones you need for 98% of your Martian cartography without having to necessarily go look for it, because that can be daunting in JMars or anything. I just pasted. I have both QGIS and an ArcGIS Mars, base model with the quadrangles, the geographic names, I just turn those layers on and off depending what level of resolution I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm.
But so once it's there, it's actually not too bad to do, but it's the finding where all that stuff is and bringing it in, which is time consuming.
Exactly. Yeah, we've had there's a gentleman in our Ohio chapter that's really good with QGIS, and he was doing some stuff with that. But like you said, it's like, if you're going to do the whole planet, you kind of have to have a systematic approach. And that's the challenge of doing it that way.
And the other, probably addressed in due time, is the platforms, sensors, and what the data products look like. The difficulty I had with some of the Martian data, when first encountering it, was some of that imagery was huge. And then the basic GIS is, some of it's taken at radically different eras in technology. And one of the things that's just profoundly annoying is that there's basically two ways to get digital elevation data. It's the stuff that they got off, 3 or 4 actually, but stuff they get from stereo, which in the case of the landing site area is phenomenally good, because from orbit you can see like rocks that are 6 inches across. And then stereo from some of the earlier missions, which they used to build the global DEM. And then there's MOLA, and MOLA is not very dense. It can kind of give you a gut check on different features. I posted a graphic in there kind of showing what this spacing is. So to a certain degree, elevation still sucks for most of Mars in terms of what's going on between the MOLA points, in my humble opinion anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more sort of, I think what the approach I would take with the MOLA data, Michael, is you would kind of average out the differences between data points. And so you'd have sort of, there'd be certain places on Mars where the terrain was obvious that it was, layered, or that there were huge differences between altimetry readings, and you can kind of fake what it would look like standing next to it. But then there's other places that the data kind of doesn't make sense. And so for that, you kind of smooth it out a little manually. So, but it's definitely a big project. I'm not saying it's not. That's why no one's done it yet.
James,
We have to lobby for a mission that will do an accurate synthetic aperture radar topography mission or something like that.
That would be very nice. Yes. Matt, did you have a question or comment?
Oh yes, James. So I just wondered about the articles. So are there any categories or your group has identified that are kind of in need or kind of underserved or underrated that you feel might, if there was enough of them, then might have a more of a spin-off effect of the awareness of space travel on Mars?
Oh, yes. I mean, what we did when we created the categories, especially some of the more future focused ones, is we thought through what information we'd like to have on the site, on the wiki. And even, 3-4 years later, we still don't have that. So we have a list of needed articles, and those are sort of the top priority ones. But if you look at our category map, and let me actually see if I can pull up. We have a couple ways to view the categories. We have one that's like a kind of a tree view. But you can, if you just clicked around in there, there's definitely some categories that are underserved. And I would say the ones that are more focused on Mars settlements and future mission concepts are the ones we want to try to bulk up more. The Mars Society conducted a couple of contests in the last couple years for people to design colonies and base designs. We did one that was a 100-person base, and then we did another one called Mars City State that was a 1,000,000-person base. And we published these in book form. We actually have permission to use all that content on Marspedia, but we haven't done that yet. And so we can kind of look through the different contest entries. There were over 100 for each of the 2 contests. We can look through that and look for commonalities and write articles about that, or we can look through and head out. We can look through and the article or the contest entries and look for really good base designs and try to write an article about those. In some cases, there's imagery that the team submitted along with their submissions, and we feature those in the books. But all that content we can publish on Marspedia. We just have to think through the right way to do it. But for someone that really just wants to help out and bulk up a category, I would say go through the list of categories and look for ones that don't have a lot of articles now, and start writing articles for those. Let me see if I can find the category map while we're talking here. Let's see. Let me share my screen again. So if you go on the main page, if you go down to the very bottom, you can click on any of those links on the very bottom under category hierarchy, and you're going to get this category tree page. And if you click show tree, you'll see in this little tree view control, you can actually go through and browse the whole hierarchy, starting at each of the 7 top level ones. The stuff next to each one, it's how many categories there are and how many pages or articles there are. So it's not rolling things up. So what this means right here is for the top level Mars planetary science, there are 4 articles that have that tagged. And then for Mars Atlas, there's 49 articles that have that tagged. But then the category, the C would be the ones right underneath it. Just the one level underneath it. So you can see there's 3 for planetary science. And if you look at areography, there's 5. You can see those right here. We also deliberately tried to not have more than 3 levels. Now, here's one exception is natural satellites, Phobos and Deimos. But for the most part, the whole category tree is 3 levels deep. We did that on purpose. So if I look at human settlement, so you can kind of just browse through this. And you can look for like prospecting. There's no articles right now for that. So that would be a good one to look at. Water, I'm sure there's articles about water. on the wiki, but they're not tagged with that because they're not tagged life support systems water. So does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, it gives a great couple areas to start.
Awesome. Yeah, like some of the things we're going to do for the Mars Society, that would be under Mars Society.
We have a category for mythology and even current mythology. I'm thinking of the Face on Mars crowd and all of those. Do they have their place here?
Yeah, we do have a Face on Mars article, and let's pull that up.
Oddly enough, I owe them kind of a gratitude because they got me started with all this Martian GIS stuff.
I'm sure you were listening to Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell and Richard Hoagland's talks then, if that's the case.
Oh,
was too.
Hoagland's the guy from the British Interplanetary Society or whatever.
No, Richard Hoagland was a guy that was studying the Face on Mars and a lot of conspiracy theories around him. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, my take on the Face on Mars is let's just go send people there and hit it with a rock hammer and see if it's real or not.
Yeah.
So
the group of, there's like that hardcore group, they expanded it once the photography kind of fairly well proved that the face wasn't, they switched agendas, and then there was a city on Mars, and then every time the imagery would get, you know, better, they'd come up with a new
yep.
Yeah, and so I took the Mimas Mounds here in Washington State. It's kind of south of Olympia, which is a field of just random, regularly sized mounds. And I did a analysis of all of the triangles connecting these 10,000 mounds and did a distribution of how many right angles, you know, what you would call a regular feature. And it's rather surprising, and or maybe not, considering tiling theory, how large of a proportion of regular features you get.
Yeah.
You know, in any random distributions. That was fun doing that.
It's very easy to create right angles in nature and create things that look artificial in nature. It doesn't mean that aliens built them.
But maybe that's what they want us to think.
So is NASA doing something similar to this? Are they collecting and collating Mars data in a way that's publicly available, like the Marspedia?
The way I would answer that, I would tell you about Mars Trek that JPL does. So this is similar to our Atlas. It's similar to JMars, but it's a newer technology. So this is one project NASA is actively working on. And then another thing that they do is the planetary data systems. All the data that comes back from the different missions is archived in the PDS. It's not easy to browse, but or work with, as Michael Patrick, I'm sure, can attest to, but it is systematically saved and archived. So I think what's needed is projects like Marspedia that make it easier for the general public to actually interact with this stuff. So that's how I would answer that.
And I don't know, it just might be my impression. They do seem to, NASA seems to focus kind of the elementary school, the high school, early college arc, but they, you know, that in between, that citizen science level, and I could be missing something, but it doesn't seem to be as present off of, at least from the NASA sites.
Right.
compared to
here's
like
where the-
70.
So like you could see, this is kind of an application. You can zoom in and out. It's on the web. It's in the web browser. It's got some information on each mission, you know, but it's pretty shallow, you know. There's not much you can do with this. So
you're at trek.
yeah, it's
Pardon me,
trek.nasa.gov. Yeah, Mars.
/Mars. And I might just have a slow internet connection here, so I'll just keep trying on it.
Well, one of the challenges between Earth GIS and Mars GIS, or aerology in general, is I have a innate feel at which scale when I'm looking at the Earth from what altitude, et cetera, that helps me navigate really well. But sometimes between orbit and very close to the ground, the evolution of the features is very similar at all the different scales. So I don't know if I'm looking from 300 feet away or 330 miles or 300
Yeah.
miles, you know. And so the other is the way the features are sparse to our eyes, right? So there's not a lot of cognitive clues that this is a tree line or this is farmland that would give you hints about altitude or the terrain. All you have is shadows. So it is really difficult to get the general sense of the topography that you're dealing with. And there may be feature sets in there that, you know, we've been looking at for decades that were just never apparent. In fact, I'm certain in the limited bits that I work with a tool called Relief Toolkit, and it basically does curvature, skylighting, you know, these other sorts of analysis. And it came out of the field of archaeology where they were looking for physical landscape trends that an ancient settlement or archaeological site would have. And I've done a tiny bit with the Mars data with that.
Yeah. So this tool, Mars Trek, I think does a pretty good job of scale to Michael's point. So right now I'm centered on the Mars Pathfinder landing site from 1997, where the first rover Sojourner drove around. So you can see kind of the rough location I'm at out on Mars. It's called Eris Vallis. It's kind of northeast of Vallis Marineris. It's due east of Olympus Mons, kind of on the other side of the planet. So if I kind of zoom in here, you see the scale's changing. So now I'm at 32 kilometers per inch, 16, 11. And once it catches up here, let me try to search for that again or fly to it again. There we go. Okay. So here's the actual landing site, and you can see the data for a second there. Yeah, the data's, this is better, right? Because it's an orbital image of that area. And now I'm at 532 meters per inch, right? So, I mean, this would be better. Like if I'm a geologist and I'm trying to study Mars, like this is a better scale for me. You know, 100 meters per inch, 50 meters per inch. Like ideally you'd have this across the whole planet and really be able to see things, but you don't have that generally, you know, because you don't have multiple passes of good cameras everywhere around the planet. Let's see, Holger, you were asking, have we selected a system to store the MDRS report data already, or would selection of such a system be part of the needed work? Is the planned format to convert the text documents to Marspedia pages? Yeah, what I'd like to do, Holger, is essentially have an article page for each piece of content. So an individual crew report, an individual crew bio, a mission summary, a photo, a single photo would be an article page or would be an image page. So we're potentially talking about thousands of new pages on Marspedia, which we actually have the capacity for. We're on a pretty beefy VPS right now. That's not a concern. It's just how do we convert it all? And we've done some proof of concept of using a tool called AWB that was built by the Wikipedia team to bulk create articles. It's kind of arcane. You're basically making a massive CSV file and then feeding that through the tool, and then it builds a ton of article pages, but you can only do that once. Otherwise, you're gonna have a mess. So we have a dev instance of Marspedia. We have a kind of clone of the whole wiki on a separate instance, and we use that for prototyping this out and testing out the process of bulk importing. But it's quite a bit of work, and also getting the exact data that we want in the CSV file is going to take a while, because the articles, the data, the content we have now, the crew reports and mission summaries are not structured at all. They're people that have emailed stuff individually using different systems for 20 years. So we have to normalize all that first, and then we have to convert it in a systematic way to the schema we want. And then we have to put the schema we want into a CSV file, and then we have to bulk import the CSV file correctly for, several thousand, maybe tens of thousands of individual articles. So it's a big project.
How many objects, in quotes, is there in that repository that you want converted?
I don't know. It's 20 years of crews, 200 crews. Each crew is 2 weeks long and sent in reports every day, 5 to 6 reports a day. Maybe 5 to 10 photos a day. And then a big mission summary at the end of each mission. It's generally a Word document, but they didn't always use the same format, and they use different, like doc and docx and PDF, so it's all unstructured.
You have like a random sampling of the content rather than trying to tackle the whole repository at once.
Yes.
A smaller selection.
Yes.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we have it all, and we can parcel out a sample. But one of the challenges too is, what do we want the metadata to be on the individual crew reports? What's good for the researchers to have 5 years, 10 years from now? That's also part of this that we need to go solve.
Part of the classification problem is, a lot of times the classification you need is not obvious, at the beginning. And so, like, my experience has mostly been with Watson cognitive, the IBM's AI Watson, the cognitive toolkit, and use that. You basically get a handle on what that chunk of text is, and then all the parts of speech. And Watson has a fairly sophisticated back end of concepts in its ontology and categories. So it can get a long way there. Then you can see what it thinks with the major top level, by relevance are. Then when a human looks at that, you go, okay, whenever they're talking about this, they're talking about geology stuff of a certain type. Then Watson, and I'm sure this is true with all the different ones, is you can then develop your own addition to that, a domain specific thing. But you can't it's really hard to get to that last one when you're confronted with this giant mountain.
Yeah, it's like data science. You got to train the model, you know. Yeah, you might take months to do just training the model, and then you run the real data through it, and then it doesn't work.
Is in kind of a directory structure, just like folders and.
No, it's in an mbox file.
In inbox, like .eml format.
It's essentially, yeah, we have an email mailing list archive with 20 years of emails, and not all, it's more than just these crew reports and mission summaries, right? It's all the other traffic that was on that email list, but they're all there. Everything's there. It's about 20 gigabytes of text, and it's their individual emails. It's an MBOX file or set of MBOX files.
Which is an international standard for email?
Yes. Mozilla Thunderbird uses it pretty well, and a lot of the other Unix-based mail clients use it. And there are tools that will take an mbox file and divide it up into whatever you want. Because it's in the end, it's just text. It's just a big text file. You just have to predict where the separators are and the metadata is, things like that. And then there are binary attachments it has that also are in that same file. So yeah. So you can open it in Mozilla Thunderbird on a Linux machine and browse it just like you would use Microsoft Outlook, you know, the individual emails, open them up and save them and look at the attachments. So it works pretty well, but that's where it is. That's where all this data is now. Yeah. Any other questions or comments folks have?
A really good effort. I'm sure in 300 years, you know, when they look back, it'll, you know, they'll have a statue of you in the center of the square, you know, the fountain, you know, the one that kicked off Marspedia, you know, maybe not the inventor, but, you know.
I'll settle for if people actually use it that far from now, then that's a success. Yeah.
And there will be warring factions about which version of Marspedia is the one and only truth.
Yeah, maybe we should, there's those CD-ROMs you can get that are sort of 1,000 years, they could last for 1,000 years. They're like M discs or something. Should probably put it on one of those and send it off to Mars buried somewhere.
It'll be the Burkus and the Devonis and the
Well, it's kind of interesting because, you know, when people are on Mars updating Marspedia, how does that change things? What changes? Does anything change?
Oh, yeah, things change.
Well,
I encountered that 3 times today on LinkedIn, where somebody that has local knowledge or perceived local knowledge claims authority because this is where they live or whatever. And even if they're completely wrong.
So I think, in my opinion, and not to dramatically switch gears here too much, I think that blockchain is probably the solution for some of that. If you have the content on a blockchain, it's immutable. And then you have a copy of the blockchain whichever planet it's on, you have them synced through sun-facing satellite nodes. But people are designing all those concepts right now. In fact, Vince Cerf was working on that in the 70s, the interplanetary internet. Vince Cerf is the guy that invented TCP/IP. Still works for Google right now.
But you have already the change history of the Marspedia as a blockchain. The change history of the Marspedia.
Oh yeah,
is kind of blockchain.
the change history on the blockchain that would solve any Burkist, Devist, religious wars. All right, guys. Well, any other questions or comments? I'll throw up the slides again for the rest of the meetup. Let's see. We'll do we'll have this meetup again in January. We have this meetup every month. It's the last Thursday of the month, so the next one is January 27th. Okay, guys. Well, hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you guys coming out tonight, and best to you. Have a happy holidays and a happy new year, and we'll see you in January.
Thank you, James. Thanks all.